So thank you everyone for joining today. Just a quick introduction before we kick things off. I want to start with myself. I'm Director of Account Management. My name's Mike Panici. Joining me is our Partner Sales Executive, Tyler Stooley, and then our Head of Professional Services, Carrie Johnson. So Tyler and Carrie, thank you for joining us today. Very much look forward to your feedback. And as far as discussion topics that we're going to cover today, we're going to focus on some key areas to consider when you're evaluating a WMS solution, because it's quite frankly the most critical component to the fulfillment management system. I think it's important to call out that there's a lot of solutions out there. It's hard to navigate all the terms and figure out what's best for your company. We do know that it can be somewhat of a daunting process, if you will. It is extremely time consuming because WMS, let's face it, is the core software within a given warehouse. And while it can be overwhelming, it doesn't necessarily have to be as scary as you might think, as long as that you have all your ducks in a row prior to going into it. Here at ShipHawk, we do work very hard, quite frankly, to make sure that our customers are a good fit, that we're not fitting a square peg into a round hole, so to speak. And what we did was we interviewed dozens of WMS experts based on their experience in successfully leading hundreds, thousands of WMS evaluations and implementations. So we've come up with our latest buyer's guide to help businesses like yours navigate this process. And that's what we plan to share with you today. So what we are going to do is share a link with you later on to download the buyer's guide for evaluating a WMS before you leave here today. And just as a friendly reminder, this is just part one of our blueprint series. So we'll be releasing our TMS evaluation buyer's guide in a couple of weeks or so. So more info to come on that.
And Mike, real quick, I've got the results of the poll I wanted to share with everyone. So I'm going to pop those up on the screen. So those should be sharing in your desktops now. So it looks like we're, heavily leaning towards the researching phase, which is great. So you're all getting a jump on this, and hopefully we'll get some good information that you can take as you, navigate this process. And, for those of you that have already narrowed it down for some specific solutions or maybe implementing, we've got some good information in our buyer's guide, as well as what our panelists will share with you today. So it looks like we've got a good mix, and hopefully you all get some good tips to take away with you.
Yeah, that pretty much aligns with what I guessed it would be, the majority being in the researching bucket. So what we're going to do here is we're going to make this nice and interactive between Tyler and Carrie here, because I'm actually eager to pick their brains. So we're going to talk about several things here. And Tyler, I guess I'm going to start with you. What are the first things that you need to do once you've decided that you're going to actually start looking for a WMS for your business? Let's talk about that for a second.
I think that first point about key stakeholders is a very important one that often gets overlooked when kicking off the evaluation process. A lot of times these evaluations start with some casual comments or conversations of, hey, this isn't working super well, or hey, we're having an issue with this, should we take a look at something else? And it very quickly escalates into a full-blown evaluation. And the issue that I see come up is a one-sided evaluation from either the warehouse and operations standpoint of, hey, this is what we need in the warehouse and operations, period. Or we're dealing with the IT and the system side. Hey, this is what we need from an integrations perspective, and this is what we need from an ERP interaction perspective. But having both sides in the same room is a hugely important piece of that. And that can extend to, hey, I need the warehouse and operations people. I need the packers and shippers, right? And the shipping leads, if that's a different team. Maybe I need the e-commerce team to talk about rating and how that applies. And then also the ERP admin or implementation consultant or whoever else is involved. So that we're looking at the holistic problem instead of, a tunnel visioned issue.
Absolutely. Yeah, one of the things that I see as a mistake, so to speak, is that companies just assign the responsibility to one or two people, forgetting to realize that you're forgetting about two or three other people in other departments that this affects. So absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. Tell me about a little bit identifying challenges and inefficiencies.
Challenges and inefficiencies, they honestly tie very closely to point number 4 as well, the essential metrics and KPIs. But challenges from a higher level look at, hey, what are we doing right now that is a bottleneck or a holdup, or where do we see some opportunities for improvement? And different companies have different challenges and inefficiencies. Some people do, let's call it receiving and put away very, very well. They have a very clean receiving process. The receiving team knows exactly what to look for every time. They put it away in the right places, good to go. Others have, let's call it a more seasonal business or more higher turnover inventory pieces or whatever it may be, and you're receiving different pieces of inventory with different people from different vendors and different trucks and all of that. And that is a huge bottleneck, right? We see this on the shipping side all the time. And I know this is WMS focused, but shipping side for rate shopping and, hey, should I use this carrier or this carrier? And the point that I'm making there is it doesn't matter whether it's rating and rate shopping on the shipping side or receiving and put away and picking and cycle counting and everything on the WMS side. What we see a lot of is tribal knowledge, saying, hey, this person or this team is really, really good at this. But if that person goes on vacation or leaves the company or gets sick or whatever it is, how are we going to continue scaling? So I would say that challenges and inefficiencies piece is a huge one for what is currently going on that we could fix and what do we need to hedge our bets against for longer term growth.
Yeah, well said. And there's a key word that you mentioned there, which I've seen so many companies go through this, and what they forget about is not just what they need today, but what do they need tomorrow? In other words, you mentioned the word scaling. Like, how are they going to scale? Can they handle a user-based model approach? Or do they prefer, does it make more sense to have unlimited users? As companies, especially companies that are growing at, 30, 40%, even 25%, quite frankly, year over year. What's their long-term objectives look like? What's your thoughts there?
I personally think this is probably the most important piece, at least from my experience, because there are two evaluation types that I see. One is, hey, this is what we're doing today, and we're moving to another ERP system or whatever it is, and I need to replicate exactly what I'm doing today. All right, I just need to continue operations as they are. That, in my opinion, is a shorter sighted evaluation process, and it's not taking into account the long-term piece of, hey, what happens a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now? Are we going to double in volume? Are we going to triple in volume? Are we going to open another warehouse? Are we going to, we're not doing Amazon or EDI right now, but we're going to get into EDI in the next year or two and start shipping to Walmart. Are we going to make an acquisition and incorporate another business unit or business line? Or are we going to start operating, a section of the warehouse as a 3PL and deal with consigned inventory? Right? There are all these future issues which may not pertain to current operations, but they are a long-term objective. And the reason that I think that that's so important is because, as much as I would love to say that, everybody loves a good software evaluation and spending hours and hours talking through dynamic picking and walking through demos, nobody wants to do this kind of thing more than once. And more importantly, the change management required for a WMS system is significant, right? WMS is a hugely important piece of like distributors, manufacturers, retailers, e-commerce brands, whoever is shipping out goods, if your revenue is tied to how many shipments you're sending out, it's a very important piece. And so that is a long way of saying that determining what you need to accomplish over the next few years will set you up for far greater success than only thinking about, hey, what am I doing today?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great segue into gathering essential metrics and KPIs, because I know there's a lot of things, when you're talking about determining long-term objectives, you need to understand where you're at today and where you're heading. And that's where metrics and KPIs come in. Just throw it out there for me. What are some examples of metrics and KPIs that folks should know about ahead of time when going through this evaluation?
This is a great question. This one comes up on every call is, hey, what are we trying to improve here or measure? Like what is a metric of success of this project? And those metrics and KPIs could be tied to, hey, how many units are we receiving, per hour, per day, per person, whatever it may be? How many are we putting away? How many picks are we making per hour, per operator, per whatever it may be? How many shipments are we sending out? What's our throughput look like? All the way through, how much are we spending per package on average? All of those different metrics and KPIs. And there are two ways to approach it, just like there's two ways to approach pretty much everything here. The most common answer that I see to this is, hey, what metrics do you have or what are you trying to improve? Is, I have no idea. I have no idea how long if it takes me 2 minutes and 37 seconds or 3 minutes and 52 seconds to make a pick. Well, so that's the first area is, wouldn't that information be helpful to have? So then you can make future business decisions on how to be more efficient. And then the other side of that would be, hey, we're at X, Y, and Z metrics, and I know that we've got some gaps here, and maybe it takes us 8 minutes to process an order. Well, what if we could process that order in 3 minutes, right? How many more could we get out every day? How much overtime or labor cost could you reduce based on being able to process way more orders in a shorter amount of time with less resources? So those are the kind of essential metrics and KPIs that we either need to establish a baseline for, or we need to look at what's currently going on and see where is the biggest opportunity for improvement.
Yeah, no, those are great examples. I think, especially it's important because let's face it, productivity is a very difficult metric to measure. So it's important that you have all your that you have all these different KPIs and metrics aligned surrounding it, so that way you can kind of narrow down and get a grasp on what's your productivity really look like. I feel like that's the thing that a lot of folks struggle to gauge. So it's important to get as many of these as humanly possible because it matters. Now, something I almost say this tongue in cheek is, determining must-have features. It almost goes without saying, right? What's the features we have to have? But I think it's worth noting that there's a big difference between a must-have, something that you have to have, and a bell and whistle that's almost nice to have. Would you agree?
Definitely. And that's one of the most telling exercises that I go through typically with my prospects, my customers in those evaluations is, hey, rank these as, we don't care about this isn't important, to, this would be a nice to have, this would be very helpful, to, hey, we have to have this. This project doesn't happen unless we've got these priorities in there. And different customers are at different stages of their, we'll call it fulfillment life cycle, where they may already know, hey, I need X, Y, and Z feature. And I've also got other people who say, hey, this is our first, effort into a real scalable WMS system. I'm not even sure what's out there. And then we start to look at the conversation of, okay, companies in your, industry, if you're a wholesale distributor and you're sending out, 15, 20,000 shipments a month, this is what I typically see as super helpful with cycle counting and with dynamic picking as opposed to static picking. We can talk through all these features and functionalities, but it goes back to, what are the long-term objectives? What metrics will support those long-term objectives if we can improve those key metrics? And then what features do we need to activate in order to support the metrics which support the objectives?
Yeah, well said. And then, there's the factor of going through the demonstration, right? It's, everyone has to see a demonstration of how the software is going to look. And I think real time is important, right? Because there's a million different ways that one can spend a demo, let's face it. Tell me a little bit about what those folks out there listening should focus on during the demonstration.
My opinion is that walking through a demo live in a real workflow is by far the most telling and most important piece of this. And to say, hey, we need to start at the beginning of, I need to receive against a purchase order. What does that receiving process look like? And the conversation is really, what does it look like in ShipHawk and what are our best practices? And what are you guys currently doing? And is this a slight improvement? Is this a drastic change? Would this be flipping your current processes on their head? So I think walking through the workflows live is very telling. And secondarily, I think there are a lot of things that sound like, lip service from a sales call. I'm a sales guy. I get it. Of saying, hey, we're super fast and we're super flexible and we do real time this and real time that. What does that really look like? And when I click, load purchase orders, are we waiting 7 seconds for that, or are we waiting 0.2 seconds for that? And being able to see all of that responsiveness, whether that's tied to features and functionality or reporting or writing back to the ERP so that everybody's looking at the same information at the same time, those are all very, very important considerations when looking at a demo.
I always get a chuckle, Tyler, when I'm on a demo and the demo, so to speak, blanks out or goes extraordinarily slow or times out. Something goes wrong, and the first thing that come up is, oh, ignore that. This is a demo, and I kind of get a chuckle because in the back of my mind I'm thinking, well, if the demo isn't working, how can I, as a customer, expect a solution to work in full production? I think it's a fair question to ask. And you talked about speed. I think it's important to everyone out there listening that, because again, there's so many different ways you can spin a demo. I think it's worth noting that if something is moving fast and it almost looks too good to be true, ask the question: is this real time? Is this speed in real time? Is this what I can expect? It's the right question to ask. And in my opinion, it's not being nitpicky. It's very important. And those things kind of lead naturally into the reputation, right? It leads into the reputation of who you're evaluating, who you're talking to. All these things matter. They all domino into each other. Tyler, tell me a little bit about, evaluating, the best ways to go about evaluating a software's reputation. I know there's all sorts of platforms out there. There's, Google reviews, there's all sorts of things, Reddit, you name it. Tell me, for those listening out there, how would you advise they go about actually researching whether a software has a legitimate reputation or not?
There are a couple ways to do it. I would say that at the early stages of the evaluation, when you're determining which vendors do I even want to work with, a lot of it is meeting the team that you'll be working with, whether that's your salesperson, your solution consultant, the implementation resources, account managers, whoever it may be. Do they have industry experience? Do they have industry knowledge? Are they software experts or are they operations experts where we're solving problems with software? I think that's a big differentiation that isn't always made in our space. Is you've got software people who've never been in a warehouse before, or vice versa. As the evaluation goes on, I am a huge fan of customer references, right? And I try not to do these all the time because it's a big ask of both the prospect and myself to make of my old customers. But I would say that's a huge, huge thing to consider when you're working with a new vendor is, are their customers willing to speak with you? How big of a lift is that? And I'm very proud of the fact that, we've built relationships with our customers where I could get somebody on the phone tomorrow with you if I need to, right? I've had people offer to walk through warehouses before. Like, ShipHawk's software, and I know this isn't a look how great ShipHawk is, but this is just what I've seen in the marketplace. Is there is a difference between, hey, I'm willing to put you on the phone with a customer and put our money where our mouth is right now today, or just take my word for it. Right, that's kind of that reputation. Is the vendor you're working with willing to put their reputation on the line as well?
Yeah. Yeah. Great point. Great point. And, I think, once you've established that you have a reputable, software that you're dealing with, there's enough evidence there. I think, and I imagine for anyone who's been in implementation, I know Carrie, we're about to open the floodgates for you. One of the things that probably gets lost, in a lot of discussions, he said, she said, is timelines, right? When are we launching? When's go live? Who should be the key points of contact that we should be working with during this time? It's so funny because folks get so entrenched in the functionalities, the demonstrations, going about, is this the right software for our solution? There's fundamental things that get lost, right? During all this discussion, fundamental important things on, can timelines be met? And if they can't be met, then what? Tyler, just to leave you on number 8 here, tell me about some experiences you've had in confirming timelines, or maybe some pointers that you would probably give when talking with software vendors.
I know I said that long-term objectives and metrics and KPIs are probably the most important. I would say this timeline piece may even trump those. The biggest pitfall I see is, and it's usually to no fault of their own, it's because the company hasn't evaluated a full warehouse management system before, and they don't understand the complexities required. But a lot of times I see people come in and say, hey, it's April, our busy season is in August, so I need you to completely understand how our warehouse works right now. We'll make a decision, and then you cram an entire implementation and train our team into the next 3 months. That's rushing the process too much, as opposed to looking at this and saying, hey, our busy season is in September, and I want to give my team as much time as possible to implement and to train and to understand workflows and requirements and all of those things. So if we're going to work backwards from September and say, okay, that means March is the 6-month piece, then maybe I want to have a decision made by roughly the end of February, so that I can make that decision or sign contracts or whatever it is March 1st, kick off a project, and then give myself plenty of runway. But that timeline piece is so important. And that it ties into the key points of context, because again, like we talked about in the very first piece with the key stakeholders, the IT team could say, hey, the integration's no big deal. Fine, we can do it in 2 months. Don't worry about it. Not ever considering the complexity of how are we going to set up the workflows and train the warehouse operators? Two completely different timelines and two completely different ways of looking at the same evaluation from the same company.
Yeah, no, that's great insight, Tyler. I think all this information is great data that I know those out there listening can take home with them. What I would like to do now is move into the final evaluation process, the final phases, if you will. These were fantastic points. Thank you for that. I just like to start out by saying, something I loved about ShipHawk when I first started here was how our sales team and PS team works together hand in hand to walk through with customers, what a possible implementation looks like, educating them on the ins and outs of it, so to speak, timelines, as we were just talking about, and what that process looks like. Narrowing, now that we've went through certain ways to narrow down the list of vendors, so to speak, I wanted to bring Carrie in, last but not least, of course. I want to bring Carrie in to kind of talk about the end stages of the buying process, because preparation when going through a WMS evaluation is just as important as everything before it. It's a major change, it's a major shift, and it's an important shift. And you got to be sure that you, again, have all your ducks in a row prior to going into this. So that's where, Carrie, I'm gonna bring you in. I'm gonna turn the floor over to you, talking about how you can help prepare for change, and going through areas that we should dig into regarding implementing a new WMS solution. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. And, as I was asked to join this today and thinking it through, I've been implementing WMSs for 30 years, either on the customer side or the vendor side. I've done both, right? And if I think through the things I wish I had known 30 years ago, maybe, right? Once you pick a solution that you think is going to meet all of those, it's going to help you with the metrics that Tyler outlined. It's going to help you meet all the required features and functions. You've seen the demo, you believe that this vendor is reputable, and you've kind of checked all those boxes. Then the next key is to really think about how you're going to get this into your operation successfully, right? Because as Mike mentioned, it's a huge change. I kind of think of the WMS, if your warehouse was a cell phone, the WMS is your operating system, right, of your phone. And then you got all these little apps and other things you do, but it runs the whole business for you, right? And so to do that, one of the key things I would recommend when you get to this point with your vendor is to define what's going to be the division of responsibilities between the vendor and between your team, so that you fully understand what the expectations are going into that. Right. And then you can get your team prepared for that, right? Which people do you maybe need to pull out of the operation, full-time or part-time, so they can focus on how do we make this solution work? How do we get all those great features in the WMS set up and configured to support our business requirements, and make sure the vendor fully understands your requirements, right? So then there are going to be people on your team who are going to be your testers, right? As the system gets configured and you start working through that process, you need to test, right? You got to make sure it really looks like you expected it to look. Does it really function to meet those KPIs and those requirements? And then training. Who's going to do the training of your end users? The vendor will likely train your team, right? Your core team, your trainers. But then you need to be prepared to train your end users. And that'll include working with whoever does your documentation for work instructions, standard operating procedures. All of those things need to be updated and ready as well. And then lastly, thinking through from a resource perspective, and I think Tyler hit on this earlier, who are the people even maybe outside of operations that the system will be affected by the change, right? Are there people maybe in customer service or in other groups that need reporting out of that WMS? And have we managed to make sure that we've covered them, that they're aware this change is coming, right? And that they know we're going to do that. You always want to reduce any surprises when you get into the implementation. And as you step through that with your vendors and you're kind of in your final stage of selection and you're thinking about that division of responsibility, think about it as well past the implementation. What does my full life cycle with this solution look like? So even after my solution is launched, what responsibilities will my vendor continue to provide, right? What type of support will they provide ongoing for account management, for help desk? So be very aware of what that's going to look like, once you go live and through the full life cycle of that solution as well.
Yeah, no, those are fantastic points. Carrie, in your professional opinion, just summarize it for the audience out there. What does success look like to you? When it's all said and done, it almost makes me, think of, it makes me think of this imaginary checklist. We've done A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. Just in your humble professional opinion, what does success look like in a perfect world, at the end of this full evaluation?
Sure. Well, if I think about it, even at the end, of the full implementation, right? What is success going to look like for you? And you know, when you've turned that system on day one, what is your definition of success? Is it that we're shipping, be realistic in your expectations? Are we shipping 100% volume day one? Or did we put into place some risk mitigation plan where we're going to be shipping 50% volume the first week, 75 the second, 100% the third? You know, what is it that your success looks like? Is your success based on those metrics we talked about earlier? You know, you want to make sure you've covered all of those bases, right? And key for me is always testing and training, right? Make sure you know, your success is, you know, that you're setting yourself up for success properly by the fact that you've completed all your test scenarios, that you've trained all of your users to minimize issues when you go live.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah, I totally agree. And you know what I was thinking about as you were talking, you know, in my opinion as well, I think, and this goes to what you're saying, I think it is the easiest way to say it is full 100% alignment between both the vendor and you as a customer. You know, from a functionality down to a timeline perspective on implementation, onto nailing down who are the key points of contact, and then making sure everyone's aligned on going through that whole implementation process, what to expect from a high level. 100% alignment. That to me, which is everything that you had just said, to wrap it up, full alignment is the ultimate goal here. I'm gonna move to another slide here, and I almost want to, Kelly, bring back our Halloween music for this particular slide, just to play it, because, you know, there are pitfalls, right? We're talking about major change. We're talking about the core of your warehouse, so to speak. And this is where Tyler, I'm gonna flip it back to you for a second, because I'd like to go through, you know, some of these bullets here on the screen and get your feedback on, because, you know, we all know WMS is a huge decision. It doesn't have to be scary, but it can be if you, again, aren't going through all the steps that we outlined before. You know, we've worked with a lot of customers in various stages. And also seen a lot of folks have hesitation about taking that big step because they're not entirely sure they're prepared. So pitfalls, well, not to sound like Johnny Raincloud, they're important to talk about, and it's important for everyone out there listening, knowing to avoid. So Tyler, let's start from the top here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. So I touched on some of these in in our last slide, but I want to cover them in a little more detail here. And the summary, before I get into anything, the best question that I've been asked, I think, so far throughout these evaluations I've been a part of, is what questions am I not asking, right? What roadblocks are we not aware of? And those are these types of pitfalls that we want to cover. And scalability, that I covered before, is a huge issue that I see time and time and time again. Customers look at this as, hey, I need this done this year for these reasons, with no thought put into, we're in 2 warehouses right now, but next year we're going to consolidate into one large one, or we're going to, you know, add another one, and we're going to be in 3 or 4 or 5 warehouses. Or, hey, our current volume is at X number of orders per day, and we're fine with that with, you know, 10 warehouse workers. Turns out we're going to have a massive sale, and the holidays are going to be super busy, and we're going to have 20 or 30 warehouse workers. Well, and that ties to the third point, which is user friendliness. But scalability can apply to features. You know, hey, do I need this? Do I need live cycle counting or EDI integrations, or do I need, you know, LTL instead of just parcel? Like, those are feature functionality scalability concerns. 2 would be volume and process. Am I adding more warehouses? Am I adding more users? Am I adding more revenue streams? But that third, user friendliness piece, ties into, and like, I have worked in a warehouse. I was the dumb high school kid who was pick packing and shipping orders and unloading trucks, and it's hard to learn how to use a warehouse management system and to figure out, hey, this is the handheld that I'm going to be using, and it's going to direct me to the correct picking area. And when I get to the right picking location, now I need to scan this bin and scan this tote and move it from bin to bin or bin to tote or whatever it may be. And that user friendliness piece may not be a big deal in, a low volume season, but that scalability piece tied with user friendliness in a high volume or busy season could make or break your busy season, right? Am I getting 1,000 orders out per day or 300 orders out per day? Because we have ignored scalability. We've ignored the fact that I'm going to bring in 20 temporary workers, and we've ignored the user friendliness piece. And now we've got an unfriendly system that we're trying to, ramp and train brand new temp employees on.
Yeah.
Sorry, I guess I can keep going. So lack of integration planning. This is a big one too, that ties to the different champions and different departments being involved in the project, right? From the operations and shipping side, they may say, hey, I just need to be integrated with my carriers. I need to be integrated with, the ERP so I can get orders and be done and not worry about it. On the purchasing side or the IT side, they may say, hey, we also need to integrate this to, a reporting or business intelligence tool because we've got board metrics that we have to report on. Or we use, a purchase order management system to drive purchasing of packing materials or warehouse equipment or whatever else it may be. And I need those systems to talk to each other so that I can make the correct decisions downstream. And that lack of integration planning can create headaches and or roadblocks during the implementation when we get to an area. And the initial team, during the evaluation, it was, hey, we're good to go here. But then it turns out that, hey, we actually need another integration and another integration, another integration, and that we've improperly planned on that, which then affects timeline and or could affect costs, going to the fourth piece. So we talked about user friendliness, right? And the way that I summarize that is just, can you bring in a temporary labor high school kid, get him on your system in an hour or 2 hours and say, hey, you're good to go. You're ramped. You're ready to go. Or do you have to have a 20-year veteran employee with all the tribal knowledge under the sun? And they're the experts in the warehouse. And if you don't have a way to bridge that gap, you will run into giant pitfalls. So, right, underestimating implementation timeline and costs. This goes back to what I said about understanding the overall timeline from different perspectives, not just from operations or not just from integrations or not just from the C-level. But if it realistically takes between 4 and 6 months to implement a true WMS system, are we planning for that? Are we going to run over a busy season? Right? Are we going to have the warehouse manager be out on summer vacation for 3 weeks? Whatever that may be, we have to understand the total implementation timeline and then the timelines of the individual players. And cost, right? We haven't really talked about the word scope, but understanding the scope of the evaluation and the scope of the project early on to say, hey, we are trying to accomplish X, Y, and Z things, and this is what's going to be involved in that. And mutually agreeing upon, to Carrie's point about agreeing upon responsibilities and division of responsibilities, understanding exactly what we're going to set up, who is going to be responsible for what areas. Too often we get brought into a project and down the road is, oh, by the way, we'd like you to do this. Well, that, by the way, could be a huge lift. It could be nothing, or it could be a huge lift. And then people don't understand that there are costs associated with changing that scope. So that is, again, a long way of saying, understand exactly what you're trying to accomplish, who is going to be responsible for accomplishing that, and then sticking to that statement of work or that scope of the project to continue in one unilateral direction and not get pulled in different directions. And then last piece here, vendor support and updates. This is a big one for me. I too often see customers coming off of other older systems where I said, hey, we bought this in 2005. It looks identical to the way it did in 2005. Right? Our performance is exactly the same. There have been no updates. There have been no feature releases. I get questions on support all the time for, hey, if I need some help building this customization or building a custom workflow, or hey, this feature would be super, super helpful. Could you guys build it? We do that all the time, right? We are constantly improving both the process and the platform. And when customer A makes a feature request and we said, you know what, that would actually be super helpful. It's a good suggestion. Thanks. We're going to build that. Our entire customer base gets to take advantage of those types of updates and those types of improvements. So that is a huge vendor selection piece that I would highlight is the vendor constantly improving the process in the platform, making sure that it's scaling with you. And are they updating it or saying, hey, what you buy today is what you will get in perpetuity, and don't ask for anything else ever again?
Yeah, no, those are great points. And, just to throw a log on the fire for a second, the two that kind of pop out to me here, because they kind of feed into each other, is the first and the last bullet point here. Because if a software, like you were saying, if a software hasn't really evolved with our industry since years ago, how can it be scalable? Back to bullet point number one, because for those of you out there, we all know this industry has changed incredibly. Like the change has been crazy over the past 5 years, let alone 10 years. And a software has to change with the industry to be effective. To your point, we have to be able to develop and customize to our customers' processes and workflows. That is just the direction of the world, and we have to make sure we're going in a direction that caters to the masses, so to speak. So vendor support and updates and scalability to me is absolutely huge. And something else, one last thing I'll just say, updates. When we're talking about updates, we're not just talking about, is our software keeping up with the Joneses, so to speak? Are we growing with the industry? But I think something that I think customers forget to ask their vendor is, Mr. Vendor, tell me about how you guys roll out your updates to your software, your minor and your major releases. What does that look like? Because it's important, because not only is transparency important, but when those updates occur, do those have a chance of breaking any customizations that might be in place within the ERP, or breaking any scripts, for example? How does that impact ERP updates and ERP scripts and customizations that might be in place? Those questions are worth asking, because some softwares out there do end up breaking. So, key point I just wanted to add on there. And Carrie, as folks navigate through the process, I'm not letting you get out of here without talking about some pitfalls to the folks out there. What did you want to leave them with for navigating through this process and things to avoid?
Sure. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. Before I launch into this, I want to add one thing to the comment you just made about the upgrades and if you had customizations, because I got burned by this as a customer on another WMS. Also ask the vendor what happens to your customizations at the point of update. Do you incur any other cost for them to upgrade your customizations? Some vendors do that, and it's important to know upfront as you think about your life cycle cost of the solution. Like I said, I kind of got burned on that one as a customer, so we could talk about that separately, but it is important. So other pitfalls here, definition of success. We mentioned that earlier. Make sure your entire organization and the vendor have the same expectations. What is success, right? And as Tyler mentioned, a lot of it comes back to expectations, right? For us understanding and everybody agreeing, what's the scope of work we're going to go live with? What's the functionality we need? How does it need to perform to give us success, right? And get that written down so that everybody understands what they're working towards. I mentioned earlier about testing and training. Our CTO likes to say that if you don't test and train during the implementation, well, that just simply means you're testing and training in a live environment when your users start, operating with the system. So always make sure you have done, there's never too much testing, certainly. Change management, right? Across the whole organization, you want to make sure people on the operators on the floor, the managers, the supervisors, the people in the back office, customer service, have we managed everybody's expectations for what's going to change and what will look different in their day-to-day operation? And make sure everyone's aware of how that's going to go. Risk mitigation. This is an important one, and nobody likes to talk about risk because you want to think it's all going to be perfectly successful. But, it's like buying insurance. What can we do to make this go to reduce our risk. So for example, is it possible to get our vendors to send us more product a week ahead of go live so that we have less receiving to do at the point of go live, right? And our requirements are a little lower. Similarly, on the outbound, is there any way we can shift order volume? If there are multiple facilities, can we shift some volume maybe to another facility or get our customers to maybe order a little early so that we have the ability to go live with a slightly reduced capacity to let the team ramp? What are all the levers that you can pull there, and to think through what those are to reduce the risk. And I think we've hit on it a few times, vendor support, right? When you launch this system, what kind of support do you expect from your vendor? And particularly in the early days, right? Will they have resources on site with you? Will they have dedicated resources on a phone bridge for you for the entire day of go live, or whatever it is that you need that meets your requirements, so that the moment you run into any kind of issue, you have immediate response during that launch. And then as you get further past launch, what does that support look like long-term for issue resolution, account management, the upgrades and the life cycle path of your solution? Mike, did you have other takeaways there?
Yeah, I'm going to, I guess I'm going to do a little wrap up and put a little bow on it. Here's my key takeaways, if I may, is based on everything that we covered today, it's truly understanding your internal process and what needs you have to make the right decision on WMS, but involving those who use the WMS somewhere in the evaluation process to ensure that you have your team's buy-in and that you're not missing anything. Being aware of other projects that might or might not overlap implementation, and what your resources are available during this time frame. That's a big one, right? And costs are obviously important, but this kind of goes to the metrics we talked about earlier. Understanding ROI, right, is just as important. It's hard to figure out what your productivity is, unless you're putting all sorts of KPIs and metrics in place, so that way you have a good idea on what that looks like. So understanding, what your costs are, but also ROI, investing for tomorrow, if you will. But something else is having a backup plan, a transition plan, if you will. Just in case, Murphy's Law happens, right? It's a real law. It happens to all of us. Implementations can go awry. So having a backup plan in place, I think, is just as important, a transition plan, if you will. So that's kind of my key takeaway on this, on evaluating WMS, a vendor, and planning, if you will. So what we're going to do, I'm going to go ahead and turn this back over to Kelly, because we obviously want to allot time for a little Q&A. We don't want to spend the whole time talking. So Kelly, I'm going to flip it back to you and go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Thank y'all so much, Carrie, Taylor. This was a lot of really good information. So hopefully our audience has been jotting down some notes. If you do have questions, go ahead and use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and you can submit questions to the panel. I also have our email address. If you have questions that regarding ShipHawk or anything else that we didn't touch on today, feel free to email us at learnmore@shiphawk.com if you think of something after the fact or we don't get to it today. But yeah, definitely go ahead and use the Q&A box, submit your questions. And while y'all are doing that, I did just want to touch on a few housekeeping items. We mentioned our fulfillment management buyer's guide for evaluating WMS solutions. So this is our new asset, hot off the press. If you want to download this, you can go ahead and scan this QR code, and you can have it emailed straight to your inbox. We will be sending out an email with a link to the recording as well as a link to the guide as well. So feel free to go ahead and scan that QR code if you want to get a head start on that. And then our quick call out. So this was part 1 for our blueprint for evaluating fulfillment management for the WMS. So part 2 is going to be on April 10th. Mike will come back to host for us again, and we've got a couple other members of our team that focus more on our shipping and TMS solution. So we'll be joined by a different group of panelists in a couple weeks. So go ahead and sign up for that if you're interested in learning more about evaluating a shipping solution for your company as well. That QR code will take you straight to the registration page if you want to go ahead and if you're not signed up for that already. And that is really everything I had from my side. It looks like, Mike, there might be a couple of questions. We may have time for just a couple if we want to touch on those.
Certainly.
Let me see what some of these questions are coming in. If you had to pick the most common mistake you see buyers make, what is it the best way to avoid it? I think we kind of covered that in this last wrap up section here with kind of the big mistakes that you all have seen folks make. I would say this is a good question. Besides a WMS, are there other solutions that you should consider as part of a fulfillment management solution?
I'll throw my 2 cents at that, if that's okay. I think this ties back to the KPIs and the metrics of success. Is what are we looking to get out of this project and why? And a lot of times the answer then is, hey, we're trying to reduce shipping costs. Okay, well, one way to do that is by adding more carriers and carrier services into your mix, and then rate shopping those effectively. So that's the advanced shipping or rate shopping portion of that. That could also be more properly choosing or more accurately choosing your packing materials, right? Using cartonization or what we would call smart packing. It could be applying accessorials like liftgate required or signature required or insurance or anything else at the proper time to the proper shipments, as opposed to just hoping the carrier catches it. But this extends all the way through to like audit is one of my favorite examples. This is a hugely valuable piece of, if you're sending out a shipment and it costs $100 and FedEx invoices you for $130, how are you catching that $30 discrepancy? And more importantly, how are you recovering that $30? For 1 shipment or 2 shipments or 10 shipments, that's usually not a big deal. But if you're shipping thousands and thousands of shipments per month, or you've got customers shipping millions of shipments per year, even a 1% correction or 2% correction, pays for this entire project. So it's one of those things where whether it's in-cart rating, so I'm getting more accurate shipping rates, whether that's cartonization, so I'm using the proper packaging materials, whether that's rate shopping, so I'm selecting the right carrier and service, whether that's freight audit, all of those are different tools and different modules or different systems used to attack that same issue of how can I reduce my shipping costs.
Awesome. Really good points. So I know we're reaching the top of the hour. There's one more question that I'll pose to you, Carrie. And like I said, if we do not get to your questions today, just email us at learnmore@shiphawk.com, and we can get those to the right person. So I feel like this could be a loaded question, Carrie. How long does it take to implement a WMS solution? Which I know that's going to vary, but is there kind of a guideline that you would say, that you would recommend folks kind of be on the lookout for when they're talking to these different providers?
Absolutely. And that is a tough one. That's a fabulous question to ask. And the bottom line answer for me, having seen varies, but the key thing is to figure out why it varies. And that's the important thing to think of when you look at your particular solution, right? How many sites are we talking about? How much customization are you requesting from the vendor? You know, those to me are the two biggest things. And then the third one, I guess, would be integrations. What do my APIs look like? How many different systems am I having to integrate to? And does my vendor already have those integrations, or is it new? Right. So those are the types of things that I see drive timelines. I have seen timelines less than 30 days, but if a vendor tells you that, proceed with caution. It's very rare. I think Tyler's estimates earlier when he was talking 4 to 6 months, right, are really much more realistic and should be kind of what you expect going into that. And then work with your vendor to evaluate, you know, those key things of sites, customizations, and integrations.
Awesome. Good advice. Proceed with caution. Normally, if something's too good to be true, it probably is, right? Well, thank y'all. I know we're at the top of the hour, so thank you everyone for joining us today. Carrie, Tyler, Mike, thanks so much for sharing all of your insight with everyone as well. And like I mentioned, be on the lookout. We will send an email with a recording and a link to download the buyer's guide to your inbox within the next 24 hours. Usually doesn't take that long, but just be on the lookout for that. And I hope you all have a good rest of your afternoon.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thanks
Thank
everybody for listening. Appreciate it.